few years ago, it was, oh, we need to, Gen Z, it's all about Gen Z and we need to have a special strategy for Gen Z. But actually really what it's been and what our experience and how we're trying to approach is it's less of treating people in individual groups. And it's more about making sure that we're making everyone's experience with us as frictionless as possible.
That's Allyson Witherspoon, Chief Marketing Officer at Nissan. And she's talking about the brand's evolution of what works at Nissan to engage different types of customers. Last week in episode 205, we talked about why general market strategies hurt growth. And Miles Worthington, CEO of the anti-general marketing agency Worthy, showed us how brands like Netflix, Google, and HBO Max engage specific communities and identities with dedicated strategies, including sub-brands, campaigns, and infrastructure built for those audiences. That approach works and it drives results. But here's what most brands miss. You can have the best campaign in the world, but if the experience someone has when they engage with your brand is full of friction, it does not matter. You can get absolute rave reviews for a restaurant, but if when you go, you find hair in your food, yuck, a dirty bathroom, yuck, and a rude waitstaff, no bueno, that kind of friction will be enough for you to never go back to that restaurant again. Customer experience is the vehicle through which consumers decide whether or not a brand is for them. And too many brands have friction in the customer experience they deliver that are costing them customers every single day. So here's what I've learned from working with my clients, talking with consumers, and even my own experiences as a frustrated consumer. Much of the friction consumers experience is identity-based. Identity is also the lens consumers are using to get answers to the fundamental question they are asking all the time, both consciously and subconsciously. And that question is this product, communication, or experience for someone like me? Consumers are asking this question whether or not you are intentional about ensuring the answer is a yes for them. Consumers are evaluating your quote-unquote restaurant whether or not you are intentional about putting it in conditions suited for them or not. So isn't it better to design one that actually helps move people forward rather than leaving it up to the consumer to decide whether the friction they encounter is worth overlooking or walking away from? That's what Allyson is optimizing for at Nissan. Zero friction. And here's how she's doing that, by considering identity in the many ways that shows up in delivering those frictionless experiences. Because identity has a lot to do what frictionless means for various consumers. So for a product that serves a universal need like a car, Nissan is finding ways to communicate with the many types of customers they have in a manner where friction has been intentionally designed out of the experience. Not by creating separate campaigns for every group, which works for some brands, but by infusing identity into the design and delivery of the experience itself. That's 2 of the 7 C's in my frictionless growth marketing framework. If you want to hear more about those 7 C's, tune into episode number 204. I'll also link it up for you in the show notes. So after this short break, you're going to hear more from my conversation with Allyson about how Nissan is going about designing experiences with zero friction. Did you know that most businesses only use 20% of their data? That's like reading a book with most of the pages torn out or paying for a coffee that's just 1/5 full. Point is, you miss a lot unless you use HubSpot. Their customer platform gives you access to the data you need to grow your business. The insights trapped in emails, call logs, and transcripts, all that unstructured data that makes all the difference. Because when you know more, you grow more. And when you get a full cup of coffee, you can do more too. But I digress. Visit HubSpot.com today. Now, before we get into how Nissan designs for different consumer needs, I want you to understand why this matters now more than ever. The CMO role is evolving, and customer experience is at the center of that evolution. Here's how Allyson explained changes in the CMO role.
It's gone through so much change over the last few years. I think it's gone from being maybe what was very traditional and then digital transformation. And now it's a lot more about consumer experiences, growth. How do you deliver growth? And then also it's kind of becoming much more of this technology and innovation hub within organizations. So I think the role of the CMO is being redefined a little bit less from just about marketing communications and much more around consumer experiences, business growth, and overall innovation and technology transformation.
If you're a CMO and your leadership is asking, how are you driving growth? The answer increasingly includes customer experience, not just ads or campaigns, the actual experience someone has with your brand. And that matters because increasingly consumers have zero tolerance for friction.
But I would say, especially for younger buyers, what they buy, including what they drive, is part of how they express who they are. That's not new in the automotive space, but more so than any groups that we've seen before, they expect choice and control in how they discover, learn, and ultimately what they decide. And they have zero tolerance or patience for friction. If you have to repeat steps, re-enter information, get pushed into something that they're not ready to do, that's it. They will abandon and you'll lose them. So I think the other thing too, especially in automotive, and it kind of follows experience law. So their expectations aren't set by other automotive brands. It's set by the best digital experiences that they've had. And they're going to expect that regardless of what industry that you're in.
This is why customer experience has become a growth strategy and not just a nice to have. Every touch point a consumer has with your brand is an opportunity to win or lose them. Deliver a frictionless experience and you make it easy peasy for your ideal customers to take the next step forward with you. Have friction in your experiences, and many of the potential customers you've worked so hard to reach and get to this point, they bail. And the challenge is this: most friction isn't universal. Sure, having a website that takes forever and a day to load, that's universal friction that most people aren't going to stick around for. But in many instances, what's frictionless for one person or one identity creates friction for another. So how do you design customer experiences that work for all the consumers you want to serve when each one has different needs? So let me show you a concrete example of how Nissan tackled this challenge. Here's what they did with their Rogue model and how they thought about different consumer needs.
The biggest thing that we saw first with the customer groups is this is what we call a C segment SUV. So this is kind of a mid-size SUV. It's perfect for kind of newer families, and it's perfect for doing the day-to-day life. That's what these consumers need their car. But what we realized is that they also just don't want to be attached and like constrained by the crazy schedule that everybody has. They want just a little bit of spontaneity. And so how do you bring that forward? And, the intuitive technology that you have in the car, the design is a big piece of it. But then also the powertrain becomes really important. And what we're seeing is that consumers, there's still gas engines are still the most popular, but we're also seeing this trend towards hybrid. And I think the reason for that is there are a lot of consumers that are interested in 100% electric, but range anxiety and charging anxiety is still very real. And there are a lot of concerns about, well, there isn't the infrastructure that's there. And so 100% EV may be a little bit too much of a stretch for some consumers. So that's where hybrid starts to come in. They want something that is a little bit more thoughtful about consumption, but they're not ready to go all the way into 100% EV. And so that's why, and hybrids have become kind of this in between gas engines and pure EV. So that's been the bridge for us. So we have the Rogue plug-in hybrid is coming out this year. It's going to start to arrive in our dealer showrooms very, very soon. And then later on this year, we're going to be introducing our hybrid e-power technology, which is an even more advanced hybrid that is not a plug-in. And so for us, we're looking at this of hybrid is the powertrain that consumers are looking for. And so we want to be able to address their needs. And then we're going to have a couple of options. One that will be a plug-in hybrid, and then this hybrid e-power technology that will come out later this year that is not plug-in.
Now, within the same demographic, newer families who need an SUV, Nissan identified different friction points around electrification. Some are ready for 100% electric, some have range anxiety, some have charging anxiety, some want to be thoughtful about consumption but aren't ready for a full electric vehicle. Same life stage, same need for an SUV, different context, different friction points. One size doesn't fit all. So Nissan created options: a Rogue plug-in hybrid for those ready to plug in, Rogue hybrid e-Power for those not ready to plug in, and Gas Rogue for those not ready for hybrid at all. Same car, same demographic, multiple entry points based on different needs and different friction points.
It's 100% about meeting the needs of the consumers. I think we know these are the types of powertrains that they're looking for. Also, for us, it expands our electrification portfolio, and we're able to do that through the Rogue is our number one volume model. So it allows us to do that through a very mainstream nameplate in a very highly popular segment. So this is in the US, this is actually the most popular segment that's sold. We know that this is what most US consumers are looking for when they're looking for something in this SUV range. And so we want to be there with that. And it helps us to expand. We've been in the electric game for years and decades. And so I think for us, it makes sense for us to introduce, both a plug-in hybrid and then, our hybrid e-Power that's going to be, again, it's going to be coming out later on this year, but it's really to meet the needs of the consumer, but also continue to expand our leadership in the electrification space.
This is what it looks like to design for different consumer needs. For Nissan, that showed up in product design, multiple powertrain options for the same car. But for your brand, that could show up in other areas of the marketing mix. But the principle applies everywhere. Identify the different needs, design out the friction for each. Brands are already doing this in various different capacities. For instance, we have multiple checkout options. There's guest versus account, Apple Pay versus credit card, pay in full, versus pay in installments. There's also multiple ways to get support. There's chat versus phone versus other self-service options. There's multiple content formats such as video versus text versus audio. And there's also multiple discovery paths such as search versus recommendations from AI engines. Now, you can do the same for the customer experiences you deliver, but also layer on identity. The point isn't make multiple products or even make multiple campaigns as a default solution. Rather, the point is understand where friction lives for different people and intentionally design friction out. So what's the framework behind this? How do you systematically identify friction points for different consumer needs and design experiences that address each?
We're trying to design our strategy around the real contexts where people live in. So if it's around family life, everyday utility, is it, the freedom of getting a first job or a driver's license, weekend exploration, something that's more about tech forward or intuitive conveniences? We want to be showing up in those places where those types of engagements and communities are already gathering. And that can be through creators, it could be in forums. Those are the types of places that we're really starting to see how can we connect people on a much more personal level, but doing that at scale.
In other words, they are trying to fit into the everyday lives of consumers, a version of entering the conversation consumers are already having in their minds. Victoria Lozano, Chief Marketing Officer at Crayola, said something similar when I talked to her about how they think about growth.
I think if you think about the brand through the lens of products, experiences, and content, it creates a much more robust ecosystem. And we could end up having a relationship or a touch point with the consumer on one or two or all three of them. But it creates a much bigger ecosystem and the role that the brand can and should play in people's lives. And I think it's just a much better reflection of the incredible breadth and also impact that this brand can have in people's lives, and to be genuinely relevant and helpful, whether it's again kids, parents, teachers, or frankly even adults for themselves.
Okay, I've got another podcast recommendation for you. It's I Digress, hosted by Troy Sandage, and it's brought to you by the HubSpot Podcast Network, the audio destination for business professionals. I Digress helps eliminate complexity, complications, and confusion in your business with frameworks and strategies to achieve scalable and sustainable success. And it's done in a really digestible, relatable manner. Troy is a master storyteller, and he really is able to communicate thoughts and ideas in a way that changes your perspective in a fun and enjoyable way. One episode that I recommend that you check out is The New Shift Marketers Can No Longer Ignore: ABM versus MBM versus CBM. Listen to I Digress wherever you get your podcasts. Expanding the brand ecosystem to where the people you want to serve already are is the way to go. And with that type of evolved approach to playing a more relevant role in the lives of the people you want to serve, that often means having a flexible ecosystem that works and doesn't have friction, no matter where the consumer chooses to enter.
That's the most fascinating part of being a marketer right now, because there isn't a one size fits all. And so you really have to understand what your audiences are looking for, how they want to engage, and you need to meet them there instead of expecting them to listen when you're shouting a message. Like, that's not going to work anymore. And so you have to really have a tight core, and it's around your brand promise, tone, and the proof points, and then allow flexibility when it comes to entry points based on what people really care about. And the trick around that is that, and then how do you do that at scale? And I think that's where technology comes into play. And that's where thinking more in terms of ecosystems versus different channels versus kind of channels in silo, it all has to work together.
Brands aren't the only ones evolving to ecosystem thinking. Consumers are thinking that way as well, even if they don't use that language.
One of the clearest signals of how these buyers are shopping and discovering brands is that they're not just searching for a car anymore. They're asking their ecosystems for answers. So it's anything from, if you're going to be, prompting anything in generative AI, their communities, creators have, they've really changed how you can create experiences and introduce brands to people. So for us, it's much more about this asking ecosystems for answers, and how do we show up in all of those different places in a way that feels fluid. And so I think for us, that just completely changes the job. We have to earn this attention. We can't it's not just expected anymore because we're a mass automotive brand. We have to really earn that, and how we think about how do we show up in AI-driven discovery? How do we show up with the right types of creators? But it's really being there in those places where people are going to be able to validate those brands socially in these ecosystems.
Now, a big part of earning attention is being authentic. And unfortunately, this has historically been a struggle for a lot of brands. But getting it right is critical now more than ever.
Obviously, there's been the fragmentation of media, which I think has changed a lot of the discovery process across all groups when it comes to car shopping. But I would say today's buyers, and especially the younger buyers, they don't separate brand, product, experience anymore. To them, it's all the same thing. And, a few years ago, we probably would have been talking about authenticity like it was something new and it was a differentiator. And now it's just cost of entry.
So how do you actually be authentic? Not just communicate it, but actually be it. Here's what Nissan had to do to ensure authenticity came natural to them as an organization.
First and foremost, we had to remove some preconceived notions about what we wanted to say about our branding, this command and control a little bit. And it became much more about opening it up and showing much more about behind the scenes, and not in the typical, like, this is like the beautifully painted, overly produced behind the scenes, but these are the people and these are the stories behind our brand. This is what we do. This is why we think it's valuable. It's little things like we've been doing a lot of focus on quality and the durability of our vehicles and all of the testing processes that these go through. And it came out of discussions with our engineering team in Farmington Hills, Michigan, and just seeing how we beat up the cars to actually prove out and test out all the durability. And so when we started to think about what are the stories we can tell around that, again, it's not overly produced. You see pieces flying off the car as an example. And that's a little bit verboten for an automotive brand. And it was things like, there was dust on the car and, is that okay? It's like, yes, that's actually the point of this. And it's not to say I'm checking the box on authenticity. It's about being real with people about the real stories that go behind what we do, how we deliver these cars and all the testing and the durability that they go through, and showing it in a way that's going to feel natural in those types of settings. And so I think that, it's really understanding what your brand behaviors are and listening to people, and not trying to have a corporate speak way of addressing it, but really trying to speak about it in a way that feels natural. Leveraging our owners is another way, and not giving them a script. It's having them tell their story of their experiences with the brand. And then with creators, and this has been a huge learning, is, it's the brief is the brief, but how they create and bring things to life, that they know their audiences way better than we do. And so let's let them do their thing and don't try to control that. And so I think the biggest thing is giving up a little bit of control. Obviously, as a brand, there are some things that the core of the brand is still the same, but how those stories come to life has to feel natural for those different environments.
Authenticity doesn't come from research alone. It comes from proximity. The closer you are to a community, the more you learn about how they actually communicate, what they talk about, what gets a response, what makes them cringe. So let me give you an example. When I was living in Argentina, I used Rosetta Stone to improve my Spanish and expand my vocabulary. And then one day I had dinner with my boyfriend at the time, who later became my husband, and his sister and her family, and they started using words Rosetta Stone never taught me. 10 Luca came up for dinner, and I had to stop them to ask, what does Luca mean? 1,000. 10 Luca equals 10,000 pesos. My Spanish practice got me proficient at a basic level. It worked when I'd go dancing, stop at the verduleria, chat things up with a cab driver, but when it came to actually communicating in everyday life with Spanish speakers in Argentina, suddenly I felt like I didn't know anything. That's the difference between research and proximity. Research can get you to basic proficiency. Proximity teaches you how people actually talk, make decisions, and find information. That's one of the reasons the third C in my frictionless growth marketing framework is circle of influence. The people you collaborate with, the people on your team, they need proximity to the communities you're trying to reach. Not just research about them, lived experience with them. So authenticity is critical, but a lot of times friction within your organization is what causes inauthenticity and consumer friction in other parts of the customer journey. Internal friction can prevent you from meeting varied consumer needs, and we need to talk about it. Layers of approval, siloed teams, doing what you've always done. These things slow you down, but more importantly, they create friction for the consumers you're trying to serve. I asked Allyson about internal friction and how they've gone about removing it at Nissan.
What really slows down, especially large organizations, is when decision-making veers far from real customer signals. So the more that you're watching those customer signals, the more you're going to be able to act in real time. And the further away that you are from that, the slower that's going to be. I think team structure can add friction, and decision-making points can also add friction at times and slow things down. And I think especially if you're still thinking about things siloed by channel, that really slows things down. And again, you're missing the opportunity around these ecosystems. I think the other thing too is you have to have a strong brand, and you need to, and growing up, and my experience being in automotive is you have to be really rigorous about protecting your brand. We have to watch out for brand protection veering into like compliance and this reason for control. You don't have to control everything, because you can unintentionally drain the personality that people are going to respond to. And so you have to think about brand management as guardrails instead of just compliance. I think that's really important. The biggest thing, it's never about a lack of ideas. It's more about the distance from the customer and really listening to what they're looking for. There can be weight of internal reviews and things like that, and that's what you have to work through. We just did an initiative a few weeks ago, and it was around how do you disrupt the Super Bowl, which is, typically like a very high investment, high impact initiative. And we tried to approach this by disrupting it and really removing like complicated briefing processes and internal review processes, and treated it more as like a skunk works. How do we move quickly? And more than anything, I wanted to understand how that worked and how we operated in that way so we can apply those learnings into the other things that we're doing as well. So not just Super Bowl, but everything else that we're going to be doing, for the rest of the year.
Friction is the enemy of growth. That's friction for your customers and even friction internal to your organization. As a business leader, you've got to stamp it out everywhere you see it. So let me leave you with Allyson's advice for marketers trying to navigate all of this.
To any marketer out there, you're doing good, sweetie. Like, just hang in there. Like, I think there's that piece of it. Like, I see you. I think the biggest thing is treat attention as something you earn, not something you buy. Make the experience as seamless as possible, not just in your category, but around experiences, because you're going to be benchmarked by what the best experience is, regardless if it's your category. And then give people real reasons to believe in you and your product, and, stories and the proof around those stories. That's really impactful right now. And then show up consistently where those communities are. That's going to look different tomorrow than it does today, but show up consistently in those places.
So here's the most important things to take away from this chat. Customer experience is core to your growth strategy, but it only supports growth when you intentionally design friction out of it. Otherwise, friction that's left in will cause people to go elsewhere because consumers don't have tolerance for friction. Also, ecosystems are how you increase your shots on goal. Make sure your brand's ecosystem is designed to work for the different consumers you want to reach, where they are. Friction varies by context and identity. Having a deep degree of intimacy and the right circle of influence will equip you with what you need to design frictionless experiences for all the customers you want to serve. Now, if you are interested in finding out where friction may be lurking within your own organization, take this quick 2 to 3 minute diagnostic to help you navigate that and advise you on your next steps. Go to frictionlessgrowthlab.com/quiz to get started. I'll also drop a link to that in the show notes for you. Until next time, remember, growth accelerates when you remove friction for your customers and for your business. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you soon.